I'm ready.
Seven o'clock, Monday, June 24th, 2019. I call the study session meeting of the Waverly City Council to order. Roll call, please.
Bergen.
Here.
Drankow.
Here.
Kangas.
Present.
McKenzie.
Here.
Rossi.
Here.
Sherrick.
Present.
Paulstein.
Yes.
All present and accounted for. Welcome all of our visitors in the gallery, and also our guest council person, Sharon Cashman, is back for her last meeting. But before we move on, I do want to recognize Sharon. She just received the Iowa Health System Pharmacist of the Year Award for the state of Iowa. Congratulations from myself and the council, and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Public comments for items not on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes? Oh, I'm sorry, I check marked it. Need a motion to approve the agenda.
I did that too, in your absence. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Motion, agenda is approved as presented. Now, public comments for any item that is not on the agenda. Is there anyone here that wishes to speak to any subject? Seeing none, we'll move on to regular business. Resolution 19-111, approving change order number 1 for the Exchange Building renovation portion of the South Riverside Park Improvement Project Phase 1. This was put off from last week for some more information, and I think Larry Kurtz is here from HTS Architects to fill us in. But before we get started, Larry, I would take a motion to...
I will move approval of resolution 19-111, approving change order number 1 for the Exchange Building renovation portion of the South Riverside Park Improvement Project, Phase 1 for Matt Construction of Sumner, Iowa, for the amount of, I'm going to go with option 2, $8,104.50 for option 2.
Second. Motion made and second. Now, Larry, if you would like to give us your words of wisdom on this, you and Garrett present it, why we'll go from there.
Okay. Just a little brief history. This is the master plan we did for the South Riverside Park, which included... This is the master plan that we did for the South Riverside Park project, which included the restoration of the Exchange Building, which is a scale building, and the new plaza there. In those plans, we had planned a wood deck at the existing scale building. It's made out of bridge timbers. They're like 3x10, so they're really strong. When we did the original design, we didn't really know what the existing structure was there, but we wanted to hang it onto the side of that. But a structural engineer wouldn't sign off on that because we didn't know what it was. So at the point we started digging, we found out that it was a hollow structure. This shows a plan of that, and that all that structure was intact, in fact, built very well. It's almost like a swimming pool, and it holds water. So our recommendation was then to drill holes in the bottom, because we did find out from Crystal Plumbing and Heating that there was no water when they did put the water service in. So we think that the ground level is low, so we're not going to get a lot of intrusion of water, and that the rainwater will then drain out of the pit. So so that plan shows basically a wood structure holding up a wood deck that's designed for 100 pounds per square foot, which 50 will hold a car or a truck. And that's basically what we want to do. We're concerned about putting a slab on grade there because any of the fill material will have a freeze thaw and raise up and down differently than the scale deck. And so we'll have multiple points where we cross that, where we'll have tripping hazards. Maybe that's all you need to know. Or if you want it.
Did I read in the materials that you're also proposing to put a sump pump in there? Is that true?
We did, but we after realizing that we did have low groundwater level there, we think that the relief valves or the drilled holes will relieve all that water. It's something we could add. If we fill the thing with dirt like they did previously or rock, if we ever have a problem down there, we're going to have to dig it all out again to find out what's going on. And we don't want to bust the structure up because it's integral to the whole building. Its whole foundation is tied together, so we don't really want to cut into it that much.
So what you're proposing is to leave it hollow and drill some relief holes, drainage holes in the bottom.
Right, to do that and fill it with air and a little wood structure, and we'll have it preserved, but we'll have it unique to the structure, to the old scale operation, because that was our intent, was to historically recreate or preserve that facility.
As I understand, some of the concerns that were voiced last week was that leaving that hollow that moisture would accumulate in that hollow space and might deteriorate the wood, the wood beams at a faster rate.
Well, take a close look at the section view. You can see there are piers all through the center, so they're all raised up above the floor. So we shouldn't have too much trouble with that. So if you see, you can see the section view. So we're setting that structure on top of those piers.
And the piers are wooden, so concrete at the base and then wooden and then
Yep.
the wood deck.
6x6 treated timbers with brackets, et cetera. And then we can always access that from the inside at the access hole that originated there where the scale mechanism came up through, and go in and check the understructure or, do any maintenance. Or if we get mosquitoes, we can go in and take care of them. I don't think we will.
What is your best guess as to the lifespan for that wooden platform? How long should we expect it to last?
Well, it can last a long time. We've got bridge timbers right here that we've got a trail on. We've got bridge on the bike trails, and it's 3 inches by 10. It's going to last quite a long time.
Well, a bunch of the ones we saw pictures of are rotted on the bridges we're looking at tonight.
Oh,
So,
really? Well,
I mean, do you have a guess about?
well, I'd say
the
it
piers
will
on the
definitely
deck?
last a lot longer than the concrete before the concrete cracks. So the guess could be 75 years.
This bridge out here was 1998, 99, so.
Is there any concern with moisture, just damp air accumulation and mold in that cavity?
Not really. I mean, it was that way for years when it was a scale structure too. It was empty with the mechanism in it, et cetera.
Okay.
So,
Any other questions for Larry?
So I see we're going to have this access hole in the building. On one of these, on this diagram here, it looks like there's an access in the through the wooden structure. Is that the I would say your scale?
this is inside the building here.
Right,
So
now,
that's
so-
where the access is. There's a big bond beam here that holds up the structure.
So over on the left, you have the pedestal floor in the hole, and you have another arrow going up to a square that seems to be that
Here?
yeah.
Yeah, that was the pedestal that held the weight mechanism. It's exactly opposite of the access hole, so it's a pedestal. We're not building.
Okay, so that's something that's basically on the floor or whatnot of the
It actually
hole.
rises up above
Okay.
the pit too.
Okay, but that's not going to affect the decking at all.
No.
Okay.
How deep is that?
Oh, gosh, I don't know if I put dimension on it, but it's about 4 or 5 feet.
Was the pit itself?
The pit itself, yeah. So it's below frost level.
It's closer to 7,
Is it?
I would guess.
Well, I think that's 7 from the top.
Yeah,
But I think
so-
that-
From the
But
top.
if you're talking about from the bottom of where the the base is going to
You're
be.
talking about from the
Yeah,
top?
from the bottom, if you had to have somebody go in there and fix the structure,
How much
how
room
much
would-
crawl
headroom would they
space do you
yeah.
have? And that's a pretty good size.
Yeah.
Yeah,
About 4 feet.
there's room to go in there.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
I just want to emphasize to people that this is not a functional scale. They cannot expect to stand on the scale and find out how much they weigh. This is just a historical replacement of what.
Yes,
had
it's of the deck
After they
only.
go for ice cream, they can scale. Before and after.
We met with this historical group prior to this, and they would like to see the wood deck also.
That does raise an interesting question, though. Is it something that it would be possible to drive a vehicle onto, and are we going to say, do not do that?
We don't want the general public driving on there, but it is designed to hold display items like Santa's sleigh or an antique truck at the farmer's market or an antique fire truck. It'll hold all of that.
The aerial would not fit on that,
Aerial truck.
the aerial fire truck.
No, I don't want to load a truck full of water and put it on there.
Okay. Motion,
Oh, I'm sorry.
yep, go ahead.
We think that the wood deck will really add to the storytelling ability of the site. We'll have signage there that explains the function of what was traded at the farmer's market, what was weighed. We had a whole attic full of receipts of, eggs and beans and things that were brought there and their weight tickets and transaction amounts. And it's just really great history that happened there.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Larry. The motion was made for option number two, to leave the pit open and build a wood deck over the top, drilling some drainage holes in the bottom of the concrete structure. Roll call vote?
Yeah, okay, if there's any discussion, just based on the information, it didn't seem like filling with limestone was going to make it
Yeah.
easier or better in any way, so.
Roll call vote, please.
Bergen.
Yes.
Drinkow.
Yes.
Kangas.
Yes.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rothy.
Yes.
Sher.
Yes.
Holstein.
Yes.
Change order number one, option number two for the South Riverside Exchange Building is hereby approved. Resolution 19-112, authorizing acquisition of property from Marvin L. and Margene E. Schmidt for the Waverly Municipal Airport Safety Zone Expansion Project. Would entertain a motion.
I will move approval of Resolution 19-112, authorizing acquisition of property from Marvin L. and Margene E. Schmidt for the purchase price of $380,000 for the Waverly Municipal Airport Safety Zone Expansion Project.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Council discussion.
I just had a couple of questions, maybe, I guess, for Mike. I wondered, when will the FAA pay us their portion of this, and where does the money come from in the meantime to pay the Schmidts?
Well, those are all excellent questions, I think, for our city administrator, but I can give a brief response here.
Either person, doesn't matter.
The next item on the agenda relates to our request for reimbursement from the FAA. And we do have a very short turnaround time. That's why we're doing them tonight at the study session, is they need them by this Friday. And so hopefully our bridge loan will be done internally with cash reserves, and I think within, I'm not sure, maybe is it a few weeks that we get our reimbursement? It's usually, I want to say 2 to 4 weeks that the FAA will turn around and give us the reimbursement.
If we miss the June 20th deadline, which is why this was needed, it'd be another fiscal year before we would get that reimbursement, so we'd have to float that money a lot further. In the meantime, we can do a short transfer based on our reserves. That'll be the offsetting factor if needed.
Thank you.
And just The other 10%, where in our budget does that occur? Where do we get that? He's back.
It's in the agenda memo on the next agenda item. We have a capital improvement account number 448. That's where the local funds will come out.
Okay.
So it is budgeted.
I'm ahead of myself.
I would like to thank Mike for including the alternatives, basically saying the other alternative is not do the project. So I appreciate that.
I know that Bill and Mike have worked on this for a long time to save going to condemnation to court and everything, so I think it's a win-win for everyone. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Drinkow?
Yes.
Kangas?
Yes.
McKenzie?
Yes.
Rafi?
Yes.
Sherrick?
Yes.
Waldstein?
Yes.
Bergen?
Yes.
Resolution 19-112, authorizing the acquisition of the Smith property for the Waverly Airport Safety Zone is approved. Resolution 19-113, approving the Federal Aviation Administration application for federal assistance SF-424.
I would move Resolution 19-113, approving the Federal Aviation Administration application for federal assistance SF-424 in the amount of $361,912 with a local match of $40,213 for the acquisition of parcel number 5 for the Waverly Municipal Airport Runway Safety Zone.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Council discussion. Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Kangas?
Yes.
McKenzie?
Yes.
Rafi?
Yes.
Sherrick?
Yes.
Waldstein?
Yes.
Bergen?
Yes.
Drinkow?
Yes.
Resolution 19-113, approving application for federal assistance for the airport runway safety zone, hereby carried. Next item is study session calendar. Item number 1, review the water pollution control facility improvements 2020 nutrient reduction improvements. Mike, you would lead us into this?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce Kevin Graves and Nate Anderson with WHKS. They're the ones that are helping us through this process. Our financing for our wastewater treatment project, a $9 million project, is through the state revolving fund program. And through that program, they are encouraging and assisting local communities with a local water quality project. And what they will do is reimburse us half the interest that we pay on that loan. And so this is something that we have not really had a good discussion on. And so I asked them to come down here and give a presentation on what this state revolving fund program is about, how it's used with local jurisdictions, and the project that we are recommending that the council submit an application for, and as well as the timeline that I think we have until about September to submit.
September 1.
Yeah, to submit a water quality project. We have chosen a project that they will talk about that we feel is going to provide a benefit to the city in helping us address an issue that we are seeing with our groundwater, which is our drinking water source, that we are seeing nitrates migrate from the surface into our drinking water supply at 2 of our wells, and we have some charts that will help kind of show and explain that. This is not something that happens quickly overnight. Our chart shows that it has been about a 10-year trend for 2 of our wells, and we hope that our water quality project initiative will help us reverse that trend in at least 1 of our wells that we're concerned about. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and to Nate to help explain this program.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Again, Kevin Graves, WHKS, and Nate Anderson. We're both from the Rochester, Minnesota office of WHKS in the water wastewater group, and we're here to talk about the specific opportunity. Mike gave an excellent executive summary of what our discussion is going to be here tonight. quick technical thing. How do we get this up on the
Should be going through.
There we go. We're in business. All right, so we were here about 2.5 years ago to talk to you about the nutrient reduction study that's going to be happening at the Water Pollution Control Facility, which are some new regulations that the state of Iowa has put out for nutrient reduction, nitrogen and phosphorus, which ends up resulting in a pretty significant project for you down at the treatment plant. So tonight, we're going to talk about where we are at in that project, the current status of that improvements project, what we're doing at the treatment plant, and then transition into the sponsored project. What is it all about, and should you guys do a sponsored project? Why is it a good thing for the city of Waverly? Talk about some of the known water quality issues, like Mike alluded to, the nitrates being that primary water quality issue, and some ways that we can help change that, address that with some water quality improvements. And that's where Nate comes into play as his specialty. An implementation schedule, how that jives with your treatment plant project, and then the recommendations moving forward. So it's been 2.5 years since we've been here. We, at that time, encouraged you to start thinking about this improvements project and moving forward with it, both from a design perspective and financing. So that was December 2016, and you have been proceeding forward. WHKS has been working on that preliminary design. We've completed what we call the 30% design of that, and have been working with Mike and city staff to review it and hone in on the conceptual plans. But you've also been working on the financing portion. So the project is now listed on the state revolving fund list, intended use plan. So you're looking at getting a loan through the state. Ultimately, the plans we're looking to complete in 2020, construction in 2021 and 2022, and then your permit says we need to be all done with this and construction done by November 1st of 2022. So why SRF loan, and what is a sponsored project? The sponsored project is a pretty unique opportunity that the state has put together in conjunction with the SRF loan to help incentivize communities to use the state's low interest loan money. So in order to, instead of going about just getting a locally bonded project, they have provided this carrot for you to say, hey, if you do an SRF loan with us, then we will provide the sponsored project opportunity. So the project will be paid for with the interest rate reduction from the SRF loan. It takes some of that interest money and use it for this side project. And it's approximately 10% of your project loan amount. So we were talking about a roughly $9 million project. So that's a pretty good chunk of change, $900,000 water quality sponsored project. There are some rules that go along with it. It must be done in the same watershed as where the city resides. It has to kind of benefit you locally. And you need to work in partnership with another water quality organization. Going to have to partner up with somebody to do this work. And there needs to be a specific benefit shown of how this project is going to improve the water quality. This map here just shows the different water quality sponsored projects throughout the state. There's a little over 80 of them currently. Roughly half of them are either under construction or have been completed, and then there's another 40-plus projects that are in the planning phase right now. So this is definitely something that has been catching on, and a lot of communities have been starting to do these sponsored projects. And what does that project entail? There's litany of different things that you can do for water quality improvement. Some examples: permeable pavers, rain gardens, bioswales, things that will help that surface water quality, stream bank stabilization to help reduce erosion, and then wetlands restoration. And that's one we're starting to really focus in on, as wetlands restoration for nutrient reduction at the surface in addition to the treatment plant. And how do we get this money? There are, like Mike alluded to, there's a March and a September application period. So twice a year we get to, if you're on the intended use plan, you can submit an application to try to get on another list to get the sponsored project funding. And the timing of this needs to run in parallel with your treatment plant project. So we're not able to really do the sponsored project until you have secured the loan with the state and they know that you're going to be taking this money through the loan so that they can use that interest rate reduction to get you your sponsored project money. And then, okay, that's great. This sponsored project program exists. Why should Waverly do one of these? Like I mentioned, there's about $900,000 of money that's there for, to be able to be used. So that's a pretty good chunk to take out for a project. And in addition to that, and Nate can talk about this a little bit more, there's this partnership that we are recommending could potentially result in even more local funding, or I should say sources of funding through other organizations that could pair up with your sponsored project money and create an even larger project. And we need to have a reason for this project. The nitrates are an excellent reason to move forward and try to do this. So you've had nitrate in groundwater issue. This graph here is an indication of that 10-year trend that Mike told you about. So in short terms, the yellow line down the bottom is a watch level. Anything above 5 in milligrams per liter is you start looking at the nitrates and start watching them a little more carefully. The orange line at 8 milligrams per liter is when you start getting in that caution area, and the red line at the top is that maximum contamination level. When you get 10 milligrams per liter or more in your wells for nitrates, that's when the state starts stepping in, and there are other ramifications that come along with that. And so you can see the general trend over that 10 to 15-year period is that a couple of your wells have been trending upwards. Those nitrates have also been tested, and there has been some indication that there's been some residue of fertilizer that's been seen in there as well. So we have a pretty direct correlation to groundwater, surface water that has been getting into the groundwater that has had some of that nitrate from the surface getting down there. So if it's coming in from the surface, then if we can reduce it at the surface, that should help trend that back the other way and help reduce that level back down to a reasonable level. So I'm going to turn it over.
May I ask just to read that? What are the yellow triangles there? I didn't see a key for that.
Different well.
No, I know they're different wells.
That's
but
well number 7.
Well number 7. And then the
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. I couldn't see the yellow up here. Yeah.
Yep.
So it is just another well.
So you have four different wells within the town. Yep.
Thank you.
So I'll turn it over to Nate and let him talk to you a little bit about what these water quality improvements would entail.
Thank you, Kevin. So as Kevin was saying, the eligible projects for the SRF-sponsored projects include a whole litany of different things. The projects that we were looking at primarily are related to constructed wetlands. And the reason for it is one of the best ways to remove nitrate from water is through a wetland. The microbes in the soil essentially chew up the nitrogen and release it into the atmosphere as nitrogen gas, which is inert. Perhaps the leader in the state in terms of constructing nitrogen removal wetlands is the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, or IDALS. You might be familiar with this organization. We work with them a lot. We've worked with them over the years on building a number of these around the state of Iowa. And we contacted them and made them aware of this potential project and asked that they investigate and come up with some potential options for building wetlands within your watershed. And the map that you're showing is the map that they came up with as potential projects. And so it's projects, they came up with 7 projects, and then we quickly narrowed that down to focusing on 2 sites, site F and G, with specific focus over on the east side. Now, with these projects, there's always the caveat of how this works, and they primarily work with private land ownership. And so they've already met with the landowners to see if they're engaged or interested in the project, and the response is yes, were interested in exploring this further. And that's really the extent of where we've gotten thus far. They've given us some costs as well as potentially what it would cost to build these projects, from $515,000 at Site F to approximately $608,000 at Site G. And these are very, very preliminary estimates at this point. So how do these projects, or how would this work? So IDALS is doing these types of things across the state of Iowa, and the way that we would envision this structure, this to work, is that in order to move forward with it, IDALS, they have to do a preliminary design. They have to determine whether or not constructed wetlands at these sites are even feasible. We could have a variety of things such as, shallow bedrock, unwilling landowner. There's a whole litany of things that could potentially derail a project like this. But the way that they would want to do this is basically it would be their investment up front prior to moving into the final project where we're using sponsored project money. They would pay for the initial investigation up front, a feasibility analysis, if you will. They do this all the time, and most of the projects end up getting done, but some of them do not. And the way that this works is this is commonly referred to as a CREP program, if you might be familiar with that. And the land, it's private land, it gets put under an easement, and that easement is with the state of Iowa. Land is retained by the private land ownership. There is no public access to that land, but the way the program works is that the state kicks in a certain percentage, I believe it's up to 50% of the project, with the remainder project coming from the federal government through the farmland get rolled in the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP. So it's a complicated program with a lot of moving parts, but the idea here is that the SRF sponsored project funds would be used in support of the state and federal dollars. So you have a lot of funds coming together to produce some really good projects. And this formula has been used elsewhere in the state to do these very same types of projects with success. So these projects, what do they look like? Well, they're essentially building a small dam that creates a wetland impoundment behind it. And this is one that we finished a couple years ago in Floyd County. And their designs are pretty standard, that they have, they use these sheet pile weirs to control and regulate water level, and then maintain drainage throughout the system, as that's a really important component. So I thought it was important for you to see a picture of what some of these projects would look like. And then we get into the implementation schedule, and this really goes down to how this is all coordinated with the SRF portion of the project. So we're looking at preparing an application in June or July of this year, with approval in August, and then assuming that if that would move forward, we could work with IDALS for preliminary design in the winter, spring of 2020. Receive the design concepts from the DNR spring, summer of 2020, and completed design 2021. So then the whole process would be that the SRF funding for the loan gets approved, and then followed immediately by the issuing of the money for, or the wastewater plant gets approved, then this money falls in place after that. So the construction of the sponsored project essentially starts shortly thereafter the wastewater plant and occurs concurrently. So when this is all said and done, basically that money gets turned over to IDALS. There's no responsibility for maintenance. There's really no responsibility from the city at that point. You're just essentially taking money from one state pot, moving it over to the next. The landowner's responsible for the maintenance. It's just that you as the city receive the benefit in terms of, significant nitrogen reduction, and ideally that is received favorably by your wells. So with that, we were recommending that we proceed with development of the application, come back here in August. We are working with IDALS right now to shore up some of the landowner interest and work on some of the feasibility. These things are very preliminary at this point, as I said. We can't go too far without, having the funding in place and having the commitments in place. And then pursuing sites either F and G or both, depending on the level of interest by the local landowners. So that's kind of what we're recommending at this time, and we'll have to see where all of this leads us. It's not to say that, if one of these projects or both these projects didn't work out, other options for this money might be available, but right now we see this as your best bet in order to address your notes.
Okay, thank you. Questions for council?
Can you put that slide up there again, though, just while you guys are asking your questions? Could you put the slide with the wells up there again?
Sure.
Thank you.
Kind of the answer to that at the end was kind of is this a one site only or multiple? And I know they had the 6 on the east side and the 1 on the west side that were kind of identified there. So potentially down the road, we could end up having a series of these kind of staged along there.
Correct. Yeah, funny thing, actually, the single site over on the west side, from my understanding, is that when IDALS approached the landowner about that project several months ago, they were actually so excited about it that they didn't want to wait. And they wanted to go right now, which obviously didn't work with this funding. So my understanding is that one is under design right now. So that will be a benefit to you as well.
Yes, I like the idea of being able to pair a project, the pollution control, wastewater pollution control plant that we have to do is a big one, but having an opportunity to piggyback some money or funding sources to do these kind of projects with that at the same time is a nice way of doing it. These are good projects to do anyways, but to be able to have a funding stream available to us by partnering, that would be a bonus.
Yeah, and I think it builds a lot of goodwill too. I mean, it's showing, you're getting benefit, but so are people in the greater watershed.
Despite the, shared cost, are there any other requirements to either the grant or applying for the state revolving fund monies, or the fact that you partner with someone? Are there any hidden costs in any of that? I mean, sometimes you have to use certain materials or certain contractors, or, are there any costs there that we might otherwise be spending less on that you would anticipate by virtue of being involved in this?
No, essentially it's an opportunity project, where you see a need and can address that need and push it out to your watershed to do this type of thing. That's really what they're encouraging, but it's not intended to be, here's a way to get additional funding from the city. This is a way for you to focus state funds on things that you value, things that you see as important to your community, versus the state picking for you, essentially.
And to answer that question from the SRF loan perspective, there are some additional costs, SRF loan versus just local bonding. So the SRF loan does have some costs in terms of wage rates, and they would have the American Iron and Steel requirement that would drive up some of the prices of your wastewater treatment plant project. If you were not to do the SRF loan locally funded, there'd be a slight reduction there. But we think that the sponsored project, I guess the reward there is worth the added cost for utilizing the SRF loan.
I think a lot of the companies that we're going to have bid on that are probably at that wage rate anyway to be competitive, so it isn't that much of a detriment. It is the tariff-driven, the whole American Steel part, that is a possibility. But again, when you look at 2% interest on something that big, $9 million, it does really outweigh it a great deal. And that's why I appreciate the analysis, because it's something we talked about a lot, and it does not affect our capacity to borrow either, which is another big benefit for us. We do not have capacity issues. SRF is not included, so.
Another benefit is we can do a 20-year loan on a major capital project like this. And I think that's what we're looking at doing, is a 20-year loan on this. A question I do have is, who will be the lead agency? Who will be responsible for coordinating design work or construction contracts? Will that be the city, or will that be IDALS?
That will be IDALS. IDALS will essentially take care of everything through their program. It's set up that way. They take care of the contracting. They take care of working with the consultant and all the construction, all the administration on that part as well. So there's really no involvement from the city other than shifting the money from one pot to the other, essentially.
And do they monitor it after the project is done to make sure the land stays as was designed?
Right. So the land is enrolled in the CRP program, so it's under with the regular Farm Bill program. So there's follow-up monitoring with that under permanent easement, and then Iowa State is actually working with IDALS to do monitoring of some of these wetlands as well, just for research purposes, what's coming in versus what's going out. So there'll be not only monitoring of the agreement, but also monitoring of some of the results, which can be nice.
You said that IDALS would pay for the feasibility study. What if they come back and say it doesn't make sense to do it? Would the city at that point have invested any money if it were a no-go in the end?
No, we've talked about that with IDALS, and they do that all the time. So we have to know whether or not a project is feasible before we can put it forward. So it's a very distinct possibility that there would be something that would derail one of these projects that they have identified. It is, and if that would happen, then they would have eaten that cost just as part of their regular program, and they're used to that because it happens occasionally on all of their projects.
And we wouldn't have had any financial investment at that point?
No financial investment at that point. At which point, you might have the option if there's time to, consider some other projects. We've talked to a few other and looked at a few other potential options that are different from this, but, should it get derailed, or should we can't find a landowner that's willing to work with the program, then you would have the option of pursuing some other things.
A couple questions on the location for sites F and G. Are they within the city limits, or are they outside city limits?
Put the map back up.
Trying to figure out what some of the dotted lines are.
Yes, G is within the limits, and F is right next to the city limits.
So is the goal here, again, looking at the map, to slow the water down so it does filtrate down, or keep it from getting into the Cedar River through the tributary that it's sitting on?
So a structure like this provides multiple benefits. It does provide a limited amount of flood control, but it's not really designed for flood control, but just by its very nature provides a limited amount of flood control. They're really designed to be shallow pools of water, less than 3 feet deep, so that it can establish all the wetland plants and the microbes in the soil. And it's those microbes that take the nutrient water, the nitrate-laden water. It comes into the upper end of the system, and by the time it gets to the front end or the release side of the system, most of those nutrients are digested, if you will, or metabolized up and released into the atmosphere.
Bill, of course, I'm not sometimes very good at reading these terrain type maps, and even the scale I might be off on, but F and G look kind of close to that property we talked about a while ago, where for development, I think it wasn't approved in the end, but is that over by
It's east, northeast of, is there some way to enlarge that?
Oh, is it northeast?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's northeast.
Okay, well, then never mind.
And where are these two wells? Wells 7 and 8?
2 wells relative to those sites.
Well, 7 and 8, Mike.
So if you know where the Cedar River Parkway is tying into Highway 3 East,
Yeah,
that is very near well number 7.
okay.
So you turn onto the Parkway and well 7 is just off to the left.
Okay.
Well number 8 is just west of the CUNY Mutual main campus. So, and well 8 is actually just outside the city limits by 50 feet or so. So, well, actually now it's in the city limits because now it's, we annex it in with Champions Ridge. But it's just west of the CUNY Mutual main campus.
And again, and maybe you said this before and I missed it or forgot it, but how did you arrive at the recommendations for site F and G?
Well, G is in the city limits.
Yeah.
F is in close proximity to the city limits. As Nate was saying, maybe those sites aren't suitable or don't turn out. Then the recommendation, I think, would be to continue going up the watershed to try to find other suitable sites.
Okay.
Again, one of the criteria that Nate laid out is that they want you to first look at a project that is in your watershed. And we said in the city limits. And then so if we're kind of striking out, then we start working our way upstream and get outside the city limits. Site A is, the watershed is a little bit, it hooks back to the west, where it shows it kind of tailing out for Site A. It actually hooks back to the west and does not cut through the city. So that's why we chose the watershed that we did, and we thought that this would have benefit to well number 7.
Do you have any idea what kind of reduction in nitrate levels that we might be able to expect this project goes forward?
I believe the one slide we had some estimates of, 2.6 million pounds, I know those numbers don't necessarily mean a lot to you, but the research that's coming out of this is a wetland like this can typically remove anywhere from 80 to 90% of the nitrogen that's coming in versus going out. So if designed right, they can be quite effective, and it's been shown that in terms of nitrate removal, that wetlands are the most cost-effective solution to that problem.
So if the landowner is responsible for maintaining the structure, what happens if he or she doesn't maintain it?
Well, they're under an agreement. I believe it's a 30-year agreement that's filed with their easement. It's just like a CRP program. They're receiving payments from the federal government every year for a number of years, and then as part of that, they're being looked up by like the local NRCS office or FSA. They have to comply with the terms of that condition in order to receive those payments. Now, I believe after the 30 years, the language goes silent, but you're dealing with the state of Iowa, and these are their projects, so you can have a good partner.
How many years does it take to see that sort of reduction in nitrates?
Oh, it's typically right away.
Within the first year?
Yeah. So they found that it's not really the plants themselves that are doing it, but it's the microbes in the soil that are in the shallow waters that are really removing that nitrate. So it's right away.
So the agreement that you referred to would go with the land and not the owner? So
Yes.
if that property changes hands, it still is a binding agreement?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Then another question I have is apparently that's a creek that runs down through all of those sites, B through G. Does that aquifer, it's going to take care of well number 7 east of town, but does that aquifer also take care of well number 8? Is that a whole different agreement out to the west?
I don't know exactly where your wellhead protection areas extend, but I would imagine that it doesn't quite extend out that far.
Right. As kind of a general rule that the groundwater is like migrating towards the river. And so well number 7 is on the east side of the river, well number 8 is on the west side of the river, so they're probably not going to see any influence crossing over between those two. Things that we're hoping to see occur on the west side of town is cover cropping during the winter. That has a tremendous ability to also address nutrients and nitrate runoff as well. So we're seeing more and more of that. It was 2 years ago we did, out of the Waverly Airport, there was about 3,000 acres that were cover cropped, and last year it was up to 4,000 acres that was cover cropped, and that was directly out of the Waverly Airport. So that is another program that I think is gaining popularity, and the farmers are realizing the benefit. And certainly if there's a benefit for them, we are also going to benefit from that as it takes off in being able to keep nutrients and nitrates from migrating down into the aquifer.
How do these nitrate levels compare to other water supplies in the area, like that might be west of here, with rural?
Like well water? Or?
Yeah, or like the water tower that's on the west side of town.
Well, they have a softening plant that uses a technology that also removes nitrates. Their goal is to soften water, and so that's what, as far as the amount of nitrates that they remove, you would typically only remove to get down comfortably below the 10 milligram per liter level. They're probably taking it down closer to 6 because of where they want to be on the hardness of the water. So there is technology that in the event we do have long-term nitrate issues that we may have to invest in. We're hoping that we can address issues that are the result of what's happening on the surface of the ground and prevent those from migrating into the ground. We're not unique. I want to make that very clear. I think we're not unique, that there are many, many communities that are dealing exactly with what we're dealing with, that the surface applied fertilizers are working their way into the groundwater, and I think the question that comes up is, why is it starting to take off? Starting at about 2009 is when we start seeing wells 7 and 8 really start to kind of trend upward. And, what causes that? What drives the nitrates down into the groundwater? And I guess the one explanation I've heard is wet weather at the wrong time of year. Is that?
That's fair. Fair, yeah.
Well, there's certainly urgency to it. I mean, there's been interesting stories in the news lately from, science about cancer rates going up way below the 10 level. So it's an urgent issue that's worth our attention.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Okay, any other comments, questions from council?
Again, just kind of looking at the numbers together, they were a little over the 900,000 that was available. Is there an option for the city or others, if we just could do both projects? Is there an option to put additional funding with it?
So that's the beauty of having a partner like Idals. I mean, they're running their own program, and they're putting in anywhere from 10 to 20 of these around the state every year. So they have their own funding sources. So it stands to reason, and from talking with them, is that, if you were a little over, that, they can use their funding to supplement this.
Okay, I think that pretty well takes care of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The state put together a pretty good summary of the sponsored project program, so I think you will receive this electronically, but I'm going to leave some hard copies for you guys as well.
Very good, thank you. Next item, which will bring up some other folks from WHKS, is a review of the 2019 Bridge Inspection Program.
I'll introduce Casey Faber, who's out of a different office, is going to review the bridge inspection that was done. We are mandated by law to do vehicle bridge inspections every 2 years, and we voluntarily have set up to do our trail bridges every 4 years. In addition to that, we added a couple of different structures this year. We added the deck behind what's referred to as the Big Six buildings. That is owned by the city, not the property owners. That was by agreement back in, was it 2000, 2001 when that was done. Additionally, there are some structures that technically don't meet the bridge requirement of being 20 feet in length. Maybe they are box culverts that are 14 feet or 18 feet in length that we wanted to have WHKS do a structural inspection on as well. So Casey will step you through that. I think in general, with the exception of 3rd Street Southeast Bridge, our vehicle structures are in pretty decent shape. But we do have some emerging concerns with our trail bridges. That railroad corridor was constructed in 1904. I suspect those are not first-generation bridges that are now 115 years old. They are probably second generation, but they're starting to age out. It was utilized by the dinner train up until about 1997, I believe. So originally they would have been designed and built to support trains. When we converted it over, we wanted to make sure that they would be able to support construction equipment. We had to build the rail trail, so we needed to pave it. We needed to be able to support 25, 26-ton tandem axle asphalt trucks. So that's kind of been our design criteria that we want to maintain. We're starting to see that we're dropping below that, and we no longer can maintain that type of construction activity equipment on that corridor. As Larry Kurtz mentioned, 5-ton design load is what you, I think, have for your scale. Yeah, and that is a requirement that all new pedestrian type structures be designed for, is that they have a 5-ton load capacity, which is 100 pounds per square foot.
Depends on what the truck is, yeah. And but in the 5 to 10 ton range for vehicle, exactly.
So that is kind of our minimum threshold on this stuff. But it would, if we were to get down towards that, then we have this issue of what do we do going forward, being able to rebuild or do major maintenance out there where we have to start getting tandem axle trucks. A couple of years ago, we had the company that came in did the tree trimming along the corridor. They had tandem axle trucks that needed to get out there. We reviewed the study, and there was one bridge at that time that had some restrictions that we prohibited them from going across with that equipment. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Casey, and he's going to walk you through and talk about some of those deficiencies and what we need to start thinking about here, maybe for some minor maintenance next summer, but also in that 5 to 10 year range, what are some of the things that we need to start thinking about?
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having us here tonight. In the past, I've been here for 3rd Street, and we don't usually supply anything other than a report to Mike that I know he shares with you, and I believe has been published on the website in the past when we do bridge inspection. But because of some of the upcoming planned needs for the trail, that's the primary reason we're here, but also just to review kind of some of those extra structures that Mike asked us to look at this year. As he mentioned, the roadway structures are in really great shape. There's 14 NBI structures, which means means that they're on the National Bridge Inventory, and as Mike mentioned, every 24 months, those need to be inspected to remain in compliance, and federal funding is tied to that. And so, that's what we're out there doing is we're checking the boxes. We're making sure that our reports and the information and everything is in compliance with that, and supplying that information to the state to then be supplied to the federal government. So the Dry Run Creek created a few extra structures, but they're very close to new. A lot of really nice conditioned culverts. 2 fracture critical bridges, Adams Parkway, that's currently got some construction ongoing, but you might remember a year ago, in conjunction with some other inspections that we do in northern Iowa, where we use an underbridge inspection vehicle. We inspect that to save costs and for the sake of safety, so that none of our team needs to be on a ladder on the ice to inspect that. We need to be hands-on when we do those fracture critical inspections to certain elements. Because 3rd Street remains closed, the inspection is basically of that closure at this stage. It's not the full fracture critical in-depth inspection this year. So that's just kind of an overview of the big bridges that we take a look at. Like I said, 8 new culverts on Dry Run Creek that are in great shape and have a great service life ahead of them. Mike asked us to look at one non-NBI structure. It's a timber culvert. We'll talk a little bit about what we saw there. This deck, just my bearings are right. Is this south right here, right? Just to the south of us out here is the deck that we took a look at, and then the rail trail bridges. So we'll walk through each of those and what we saw and what needs to happen. So real quick, Adams Parkway update. So this bridge was built back in 1968, and you expect maintenance on a bridge. This bridge is actually beyond what we would typically expect needing maintenance, partially because of the volume. Also, it was constructed well, and so an overlay, which is what's being performed out there, where they mill a portion of the surface off, they make repairs to the deck in areas that are necessary, and then they pour back a 1 3/4 thick overlay surface, is typically expected anywhere in the 25 to 30 year range when the DOT talks about their bridges that are a lot higher volume. And so, we're looking at a significantly longer life that you've gotten out of this bridge without those repairs. Additionally, the ends of the bridge, we're replacing the joints. The previous joints were just 2 plates that slid over top of each other. So it didn't prevent any water from getting down. And so the joint that's being replaced there actually has a gland in it that allows the bridge to move, and so it can stretch, but it also keeps water from getting down and affecting the ends of the beams and the bearings. And so it'll provide additional life to the abutments and to those beam ends and bearings. So the repair, we would hope to see, again, at least in their 25 to 30 years before any additional maintenance is out there. The way that bridges are designed is we take into account that wearing surface, that additional 1 3/4 that's being put on out there ahead of time, so this doesn't have any impact on load restriction or anything like that. We verify that ahead of time before we raise anything or add dead load, obviously. So a quick update on construction is that it sounds like the bridge will be open on Friday. So the contractor might be out cleaning some stuff up on Saturday, but they plan to have the roadway open on Friday as of conversations this morning. So.
Casey, I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I don't want to interrupt your presentation, but what do you really mean by fracture critical? I don't understand what that means.
Fracture critical is a non-redundant steel structure with tension elements. So that's the book definition, right? And so this Adams Parkway Bridge is a steel bridge. It's got 2 beams, and because it only has 2 beams, it's non-redundant, meaning if one of those beams would fail, the whole structure fails. The truss out on 3rd Street, because there's only two trusses running parallel, if an element that's in tension would fracture on that truss, it wouldn't be able to support itself because it can't distribute the load. If you have more than 3 members, or 3 or more members, then you have redundancy in the system. And so any structure that is made of steel that doesn't have appropriate load redundancy is considered fracture critical. And so that's somewhat helpful. That's our book definition for my training.
For example, the Cedar Parkway, where we're putting this great new bridge, it's got all kinds of extra beams in it.
It's got extra beams beams and they're made of concrete.
And
So
it is not fracture critical.
Exactly, it is not fracture critical.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful.
The unfortunate incident on I-235.
Yeah, so one of the most public recent failures of a fracture critical structure that was up in the Minneapolis I-230 or I-35 west up there because of one gusset plate and a lack of redundancy. When that gusset plate fractured, because of the age, the loading, the stresses that were built into that structure and what was all going on at the time, the whole thing went in the water. So.
Just trivia, I was there that night. I almost took the bridge when it went down, but changed my mind and went on a local street.
Yeah, I was an intern up in the Twin Cities when that happened, and I got a lot of phone calls that night from people making sure I was okay. So, yeah, it's
Okay, thank you. Now I know what fracture critical means.
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier and Mike pointed out, we often inspect structures for other communities and counties that we work with that aren't on the NBI because the reality is they still are subjected to traffic and pedestrian loads, and there's a safety concern in some of these cases and an inventory concern that you'd have from a programming and budgeting standpoint. If you're not monitoring condition, you don't know when an expense is going to come up where you might need to replace a structure. And so Mike asked us to take a look at this one on 20th Street Northwest. This is our first inspection, so we don't have a lot to go off of. This is an initial inspection. We don't know when it was constructed, and we don't have a timeline for the rate of deterioration. So our recommendation moving forward would be to keep inspecting this thing on the 2-year cycle so we can kind of monitor it. What we found was that as a timber structure that's subjected to moisture, would it be expected, something of this age, there's rot that's taking place. Is it a structural concern? Not from where we stand for similar structures that we inspect in other counties and cities. So we don't have any immediate close this thing, get it replaced concerns, but at the same time, there's rot. As you can see in this next picture, my hammer, I didn't have to hit that. I could just poke the tail of the hammer through there. And so the way that these are constructed is that they're individual 2 or 3 inch boards that are laminated together. And so that's one board that's rotted out. And there's not large areas. They don't progress the way that spalling in concrete progresses because it's all a continuous wall or continuous mass. It'll isolate to a specific timber before it spreads rapidly because of the construction type. So we don't have serious concerns about this now, but we want to bring it to your attention because down the road, it's not going to last forever. You're seeing timbers rot through. There's a little bit of scour at the inlet. At the outlet side of things, there's a CMU wall and the apron coming out where we could see some of the block face beginning to fail. The settlement. We don't know enough probably about the right-of-way in the area. Does the city own that wall? Does the property owner? That would all come down the road in planning for some sort of a repair replacement project. Go ahead.
Question, Casey,
Yeah.
just for location, is that the one that's part of the curve?
Yep, if you're going north before you hit the curve, if you go straight instead of going north and then west on the curve.
So it'd be south of Fifth Avenue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So, the recommendation or the perceived replacement there would be a concrete culvert pretty similar, probably a single cell would fit there. There's sizes that are large enough to replace that as a single cell. And we're looking in the neighborhood of probably $120,000 to $140,000 to do the culvert and the roadway work adjacent. And so that's something that we want to make you aware of so that the proper planning is there. I don't think that this is a 2-year thing or a 5-year thing necessarily, but it might be it's probably a 10-year horizon thing that you want to plan for. And be watching if spot repairs are necessary or some protection needs to be installed to extend the life a little bit till the city has that budgeted and planned for. Any questions on that structure at all? The next area that Mike asked us to look at that was a little different than we've done in the past is this deck, like we mentioned, off the north side of the buildings on Bremer Avenue. I think it was brought to his attention that the public maybe had seen some of the paint flaking. Corrosion is a really ugly thing, and it's in your face when what's directly adjacent is bright green, right? And so, it was brought to our attention. We had the plans Mike shared with us, and so we could kind of investigate how it was built, what was out there, and then from our side of things, structurally, is the amount of corrosion a concern from a loading perspective? And what we found was that primarily the corrosion's taking place on the top posts that are on the north edge. And so where that sidewalk drains away north of the buildings and a sidewalk deck, and over the edge, it's dumping whatever salts those business owners are likely throwing out there, and understandably so. As an elevated sidewalk, it's naturally going to freeze very quickly, and so ice mitigation is pretty necessary for them there. That's the primary cause of the corrosion that you're seeing there. One thing about steel is that when you get that leaf rust that happens like that, once the paint system fails, the corrosion is expansion of the laminations of steel. And in an inch of lamination that would spread away from the steel, that could be, it's likely less than a 1/16 of the actual steel loss, because it goes down to kind of a microscopic level. And so the corrosion that we found isn't a structural concern to us, but you now have exposed steel that every winter is going to be cyclically exposed to salt, and is going to, once it's exposed, the rate advances substantially. And so we would recommend getting this programmed quicker than that timber culvert for replacing, for getting repairs made to the paint system there. We prepare plans, and we do a lot of observation for the state for bridge painting. It's a similar procedure here. Because of the public access, some of the railings might be able to be unhooked and hauled off site and done in a shop and reinstalled, but these are embedded in concrete, and so they're going to have to be done on site. The likelihood of dangerous contaminants in this paint versus bridge paint is very low because it's not that old. You probably follow the same procedure though. Send in a paint sample, make sure, as long as there's no dangerous constituents in the material, you wouldn't need total containment. They could probably do spot cleaning and painting. We do that and see that done with hand railings often, where they would use hand tools rather than doing a full blast. But if you wanted to, you could do a full blast and completely replace the paint system. If you were to go to that level, you could easily probably see a $60,000 project for the entire length of railings along the wall, along the upper deck. And then one of the areas that was, so you can see here somewhat, the before and after of hammer cleaning. And so that's knocking the corrosion loose. There's very, very light pitting. It's not of a substantial, like I said, it's not a structural concern. One of the areas where it's a little bit more pronounced is coming down the stairs on the west side. And again, salt on those stairs. They're supported by a steel kind of outrigger that's bolted to the wall, and so the bottom's there. All that salt just slowly runs and drips down, and that system has failed. And because that steel is expanding as it corrodes, it's anchored and embedded into those concrete steps, and so it's spalling some of the concrete adjacent to those anchors as well. And so again, another reason that you want to address this before the spalling advances, and those steps need to also be replaced. So just bringing that to your attention. But again, this is an area that more than spot cleaning, you probably on the stair tread supports probably want to clean and paint the whole piece, just because of the extent of the corrosion there. But again, like I said, it could easily be in the $50,000 to $60,000 range, depending on the level of containment and the type of removal that's necessary. So
the way you're describing the corrosion caused by salt here, sounds like there's no way of getting a good fix on this. This is going to be an ongoing problem.
It's likely an ongoing problem. What we typically attempt to do, what we've done at the Cedar River Parkway with the plans that we prepared there, is galvanizing before painting, so that even if the paint system fails, there's a secondary coating. And so that's kind of the standard of practice now, that has developed over the years to exposed railings and things like this. It's not done everywhere. It's definitely a little bit added cost, but should improve the lifespan and reduce the maintenance on railings that are going to be exposed to road salts or sidewalk salt. So,
is there any way to mitigate the salt water on the deck from rolling over the edge and back underneath to get into those beams?
Yeah, so going back here,
steps wouldn't be, but
so you can kind of see here on bridge decks on the overhang, we put a drip edge in, cast on the underside of the edge, so that it doesn't migrate down the side, the underside of the deck down to the face of the beams. Something like that, you have a drip edge on the side of your roof that directs things along the side away from your fascia, so that it doesn't collect there and into your gutters and everything. And so something might be able to be installed to mitigate that. And again, I don't know if I have a picture of another picture of the steps again there, and up close on the right-hand side, you can see the spalling. The extent on the railing is pretty minor, and it's really isolated primarily to that base plate. And you can see my best guess is that it's because of the salt, and it runs past that and down below, and that's why the posts, you're seeing the worst case at the top on the outside. So installing something that would act like a drip edge could definitely help prevent that from happening on the posts down the road. Again, the railings, what's on the base plate, we're not seeing the expansive leaf rust, we're not seeing major section loss. It's really just starting at the base plates of those railings. Not a whole lot you can do there unless you would install some sort of a grout pad or some sort of spacer, which could be done, but that's to be seen probably how far you'd want to take it. Again, added cost to modify the connection detail there. So, and you can see in the picture on the right, the last thing to bring to your attention is those salts aren't just migrating down to the posts, but they're leaching through the deck. And so concrete naturally cracks. That's what it does. We know it does that. It does that as designers. We try to design the reinforcing that's inside of it to distribute those cracks evenly, rather than having a large crack in one location spread out, over a large area, because that's a natural entry point for those corrosive elements. This is distributed pretty evenly, but you can see where there is cracking, and that cracking, you're starting to see that leaching of those salts in through there. It's not a major concern at this point, but something to watch, as we would expect that eventually those salts will begin to corrode the reinforcing that's in there. There's no sign of corrosion coming through the bottom of the deck at this stage, but that's when we start to have concerns about what's happening inside the concrete, and the reinforcing is what's structurally holding things together and providing the majority, in conjunction with the concrete. The support comes from both acting together. So. Questions on that one? All right. The rail trail is what I think really initiated us coming to talk about our inspection. As Mike mentioned, we do these inspections every 4 years. We inspect trail bridges for some cities every 4 to 5, similar to yours. As I mentioned, we inspect bridges under 20 feet for some cities and counties on a extended, some every 24 months because we're already out there. And so this historically we've been doing every 4 years. And so it's been a few years since we've been out there, and just wanted to provide an update. As Mike mentioned, the trail itself, to plan for the construction vehicles that may need to use the bridges to repave the trail down the road, there's some repairs that need to take place. The trail itself, being built in 1999, took advantage of what was out there. Rail trail conversions are great because those bridges were built in a really robust way to support train loading that is a lot more significant than the trail loading that you're seeing, and even more significant than the truck loading, as you'll see in a couple minutes here. But it's significantly older than the rest of the trail. You know, we utilize the existing timber stringers that run down the bridge, and we put new cross ties and decking and asphalt and rails on top. So we kind of replace the deck and up, and everything below that is older, and it's probably past its design life, and we're seeing the results of that now. So there's some maintenance really required to keep these in service, especially for construction vehicles in a few years, and probably some consideration for the council and the community from a programming standpoint of what's the best direction from a cost benefit. We've got a little bit of cost information, but it's probably some sticker shock that we'll get to in a minute. So this is a picture of a roadway bridge. Just the terminology, we're kind of talking about the same thing. I tried to make it contrasting a little bit, but the bridge consists of we got the rails when you're standing on it. Everybody knows what rails are. The deck is what you're standing on. Below that is supported by beams that run from one end to the other. The construction type that we're seeing for most of the bridges, other than the Cedar River Bridge, is timber pile bent construction. And so there's an abutment pile bent and pier pile bents. And so that means that they're individual pile columns tied together with some bracing. So you can see I've noted the piers. And then on top of that is a cap that connects the heads of those piles and supports the beams that run across. So just trying to keep some language out there in front of you, so when I say abutment and pier, you know kind of generally where I'm talking about. So abutments are at the end, piers are in the middle. So there's 8 bridges out there. We'll go kind of out of town, back towards town. So Ivanhoe's is the first one, farthest east. We're just going to go over condition of what we found out there. So the west abutment, the cap was found to be split and hollow, and so that's a big 12 by 12 or 10 by 10. Most of these are 12 by 12, but square member that's running on top of the piles, supporting the ends of the beams of the bridge. So it's split. There's hollow sounded areas. Nothing that we could break through or warrants an immediate action. Third and fourth piles, these are typically 6 piles in a row, but numbers 3 and 4 from the south were found not to tangibly carry load from a structural consideration. We generally rate things on a 25% scale, and anything under 25 we don't consider to carry load, because we're trying to predict as best we can the lifespan till our next inspection. That's our approach. And so if it's less than that, we don't want to consider it carrying load for 2 to 4 years, depending on inspection cycle. So some of these are carrying some load when we say worthless, but it's our way of saying that they're at the end of their life, and we structurally aren't considering them to carry load.
So you're saying that they did function once, but they're not functioning now?
Precisely.
Okay.
Yeah. But these were built for train loading, and now we're subjecting it to significantly lower loading. And so we'll get into which ones actually have structural capacity reductions in a minute. There's a pier, third pier from the west, that the cap is split and hollow, and then 2 piles. They're very hard to see, and especially from this angle. I'm going to say I didn't take this picture, but that's all right. 2 of the piles had some collision damage because there's a roadway that passes right underneath, right next to that pier. And so there were some repairs that were made that no longer are effective. You can see on the picture on the right, you can see down into that one pile cap. This is again outside of the bridge, and so it's not really supporting anything at this location, but it's because it's a continuous member, that deterioration is creeping in longitudinally, and it has a reduced capacity. So at Baskins Creek, at the east abutment, we found 1 pile to be worthless and others deteriorating. The west pier, there's 2 piles, the south 2 piles that are worthless. You can see some of the necking on that picture. It's a little bit far away. I tried to include a picture, but they aren't all perfectly of the defect that we're talking about. At Prairie Run, you can see this pile, one of them at the west abutment that was found to be worthless. There's two there that were found to be worthless. And so it's hard to tell exactly from this picture, but you can see down into that pile. And so the way that wood works is that at the ends of a longitudinal member, like a pile or a post or a 2x4, that's where the grain is going to wick moisture in. And so naturally the top of a pile cap will wick moisture down into it and it'll rot from there. And so here this one wasn't directly under the cap, and so we can see down into where it's rotted out and is no longer providing full and good support anymore. The east back wall's got some planks that are rotting through, and that means that the fill behind those planks that's underneath the trail is starting to come through, and if that progresses, you can lose that fill support and the trail can collapse behind there. Again, not an immediate concern, it's not large enough, but it's an area to watch and that we would recommend repair at. And then the second pier from the west has one worthless pile. At Slemons Run, again, this one, the cap at the west abutment split and rot. You can see as that runs up the picture, that board that's sitting on top is the first bridge beam that supports the deck. So in that case, we're starting to see that deterioration enter under where the loads are supported from the deck above. So this is one of them that we rated based on incomplete capacity and reduced section. We'll get into what we came up with there in a minute. Two worthless piles also at this abutment, and then one worthless pile in each of the west two piers, and the bracing has failed. So you can see here the west abutment cap again on the left. The third pile, that end pile, it doesn't look like a pile because it's a shell at this point that we broke through with our hammer when we were sounding it. And so that one's worthless, really worthless. And then you can see the picture below, again, a pile that it's no longer anything but a shell. And so once they're wet, once there's a void, we see insect damage. And again, these are piles that are probably at least 50 years old. So not uncommon to start to see this type of deterioration. I mentioned the bracing has failed, so the photo here is actually at Prairie Run. I tried to circle in red. So we're looking at the bridge, and those are two piers, and there's two X's between those piers. And so with the height of some of these structures, not having the bracing between them really reduces the strength. If you think about having a yardstick and you push down on the top of it, it just starts to buckle and bow out. If you have somebody hold in the middle and push down on the top of it, the strength is dramatically increased. And so that's what the bracing is doing. And so not having that bracing is okay for the loading that we're currently seeing for the trail users, but it's not okay for the construction equipment. And so replacing the bracing is another one of those recommendations for allowing this bridge to be used for construction equipment down the road. Cemetery Run, this is a better close-up picture of another one of those piles that the west abutment has one, and the east abutment has two. Some rotting of that cap, but again, those abutments that become shells, and once you really break through, we sound them, but we don't know. If you can't see it and you're only listening, we have to use some estimation. We try to be conservative, but at some point this is where they end up, is that hollow grows from the inside out, and at some point you break through. And so this is the track that really all of the timber piles that are out there are on. Then finally, the Cedar River Bridge. This is just to the north here of City Hall, and the abutments and piers, there's some deterioration. Those piers are constructed out of limestone blocking with mortar between, and so there's some breakdown of some of the mortar. We haven't seen significant changes. As I mentioned earlier, it was our first inspection out on 20th Street. We don't know what the rate of deterioration is. Here, we've been inspecting these for several inspections, and we aren't seeing major changes. We're not seeing settlement. There's deterioration, but it's not a red flag concern because we know that it's not progressing beyond what it was the last inspection. It's very similar to that. And so there's deterioration, but it's not an immediate thing to repair. It's not advancing significantly. The deck planks are something that we would probably recommend going out and making spot repairs on, primarily from a user standpoint. It's not a major structural concern or danger, except for serviceability, that somebody gets a toe stuck on it or a bike, the ride isn't as nice. And so after 20 years, you expect to see some wear and tear, and that's what we're seeing in the deck out there right now. So,
Rod, do you think that damage was caused by a golf cart?
So, as Mike mentioned, to get the bridges sort of up to snuff for construction vehicles, there's probably about 30 piles that we would recommend repairs at, about 10 pier caps, that one back wall that we mentioned. I jumped the gun here. So back to restrictions. Sorry, we'll go backwards just a second. Baskins Creek was one that we rated and found to limit trucks to 22 tons. That's not a major restriction. You're not planning to go out there with asphalt trucks right now, but because of the lack of total ability of those piles to support the loads, it's reduced based on the effectiveness of them. At Slemons Run, at that west abutment where that cap was rotting and not complete anymore, and there was a couple of worthless piles, we were saying no maintenance. So this has all been passed on to Mike already. This isn't his first exposure to it. No maintenance equipment until repairs are made. There's one pile that's actually got a 2-inch gap between the top of the pile and the cap. It's likely from construction, but by going out there and shimming and blocking, you provide some additional support that would engage that pile into the loading. And so there's some immediate things that can be done, but the replacement of the worthless piles is a much more major deal. So as I was getting to, jump the gun on a little bit, to get through the next 5 to 10 years and to get through construction equipment for repaving the trail, about 30 caps, 30 piles, 10 caps, one back wall, and then that bracing at Slemons Run. And because of multiple sites, because of individual piles in sometimes hard to access areas, we do our best to estimate what that looks like, but we think that those repairs could be in the $150,000 to $175,000 to get things up to a 5 to 10 year type of a fix. It's really hard to say what the bidding climate will be, and when you're doing little small repairs at a lot of different little sites, the mobilization goes up, the access is pretty difficult on some of those slopes, and so it's not going to be an easy project, even though it's timber is an easy material. There's some great things out there though that the DOT has done in researching methods of repairing piles in the field, reusing what's out there, and so we've provided some of that information to Mike, and we've seen a lot of county engineers use that with their own forces. Now we've also seen cities and counties hire contractors to come in and use those methods that have been tested and shown to work. There's other, these are helical piles that can be installed with small equipment like a small track excavator or skid steer that has a pneumatic rotary tool on it that can screw these into the ground. And so that's another option to replace piles and provide supplementary support in the areas that really need it. But you're talking probably similar costs. And so what it boils down to is maybe it's providing the contractor options and alternatives that would get you the best, most favorable bids to let them choose the method they're best at, or that they see fitting in whichever circumstance, because that's really probably what the plans would consist of, identifying locations and then providing typical repair options that would allow the contractor to utilize what works best for them in the situation that they encounter in the field. The cap replacement is going to have to be jacking and supporting the structure, removing and replacing. So there's not a lot of ways around that to replace that timber cap that goes on top of the piles. But there's options out there that are tried and true and that can be done in some of those difficult access situations. So we've kind of talked through some of that information with Mike and want to provide it to you as well, just to let you know this is the type of repairs that we based our estimate on, along with kind of best estimated kind of inflation for the cost to hit multiple sites and to hit those difficult access areas and to really do small projects at a lot of sites. So.
As far as funding, I know there's grants, those type of things out there to put the trails in. Is there any programs out there to help maintain them?
There's not much out there. We've seen more. I think that again, this is similar to the nitrate discussion. You're not alone in this. Communities that utilize funds to set up rail trail conversions are seeing substructure deterioration because it's the end of that railroad construction life cycle. Because it's kind of a known issue now, we're seeing some communities or county conservations that have the resources or the ability to fundraise ahead set up endowments. And so that's something that probably is your best bet from a maintenance. And that's kind of where we wanted to finish, is that it's a significant investment. $150,000 to up is not nothing, and it's a 5 to 10 year deal. And you could foreseeably be spending that again in 5 to 10 years after that and just continue. And so from a city planning standpoint, we want to make you aware of it and help you kind of understand that so that you can program and plan the best possible for your budget, for your setting, and compare that with replacement. Replacement can we ran some real quick numbers kind of based on replacement trail bridges that we've done in some other areas, and the range from some of the smaller structures out there, could be $150,000 to $160,000 for the individual structure. And so we're talking about that for a repair right now for several of them. But then you look at the Cedar River Bridge and you could easily spend $1.4 million. And so for a total price tag, if you're going to replace all 8 structures, we could easily see that probably go to $4 million for the structural work alone. And so that's not going to be achievable probably in one shot, and that's where I'm going to hand it over to Mike.
If they were all new, Casey, you're saying if they were all new, it would be 1.4 million, yeah.
So,
Casey, just to reiterate, you're saying that these bridges are safe, the trail is safe for your typical loads, it's just for heavy construction vehicles?
Yep.
So we don't have people panicking and avoiding the trail?
Precisely, yep.
And in the case of these worthless supports, I love that term, it's fair to say that
they're not fracture critical.
The bridge is not compromised because of them at this point.
Yeah, and so we took a look at location, and we rated structures that warranted it based on having worthless piles, and so that's our primary concern. I mean, that going back several years, that's why we closed the 3rd Street Bridge, or recommended closure of the 3rd Street Bridge. Public safety is the primary concern. So we've relayed to Mike what restrictions need to be out, and so it's those 2 structures that we recommended some restrictions at, but not anything for the typical trail use.
And maybe we need to clarify too, I'm guessing, although I don't know this, you can confirm it, when you use the term worthless, it's a technical term that's under 25%, or, I mean, it doesn't mean that the whole structure is worthless.
Precisely, it's a single element, and again, where there's redundancy, like I mentioned, these were built for railroad loading, and so some of these have 6, some of them have 12 to 16 piles in a single unit that supports the span. And so where 1 or 2 are worthless, that doesn't mean that the whole unit is worthless or that the whole structure is worthless. And so we've taken in critical locations where we found what we would consider non-capacity contributing piles, and taken a look at does that impact the ability of the structure to safely carry loads as a whole. So we've taken that into account.
So now that Casey has your attention and you're awake, I'm going to step in and provide some other options. So as Casey indicated, that if we were to basically replace the structures kind of in kind, capable of supporting construction equipment, here's the price tag, okay? There are other options for load capacity we talk about was the minimum threshold, and that's like a 5-ton load capacity. So you're looking at a pickup truck type of unit out there. So if we can develop, like permanent access and easements in between the structures for construction equipment, then we wouldn't have to design the bridges to support loaded asphalt trucks. Okay, so that is an option. And so then if you look at, do we want to preserve these structures at the same elevation, or can you, in effect, grade it down and shorten the span of of a new structure? That can change the cost as well. If you bike far enough and head out across Highway 63, a mile east of there, the county did this. They have a creek that they crossed, and in order to shorten the bridge span, they graded the trail down. So you got pretty good grade that you're coming down, but it's a much, much shorter bridge structure. And that one may not be designed to support construction equipment. It may be designed to support the smaller maintenance and have that 5-ton minimum load capacity. So there are options, but what we want to bring to your attention is we've been doing inspections now on these structures for 20 years, and we've been documenting the deterioration on these bridges and noting what the concerns are today, and that I think it's one structure is down to a 22-ton load capacity. We want to make, the public aware of that, so our staff aware of that, so that we're able to restrict the loading on that. The question that comes is, do we look at trying to program $150,000 to make repairs on structures that are going to need repair again in another few years, so we start going through the cycle, or do we start looking at the pavement is going to age out here. We're already starting to do some spot overlays on the pavement sections. And, are we looking at, say, 2025, 6 years from now, that we're going to need to be making more substantial investment because, maybe these it's not just one structure that's load embargoed, it's maybe now 4 of them that are load embargoed, and maybe one of them is the one that's down to 22 tons, maybe down to 5 tons. So maybe we defer spending money on the short-term repairs with the intent that we're going to make a longer-term investment and maybe do a replacement in that 5 to 10 year time frame.
What's the longevity of the new structure?
So typical new structure design life, we say 75 years, and so that's appropriate maintenance. That doesn't mean that there's no cost between 0 and 75 years, but that's the design lifespan.
And that's replacing with wood or using like the helical?
So that would be for a new structure. So for the pile repairs, because it's a repair to the existing structure, we would expect more maintenance more frequently on the other elements of that structure that would happen before the lifespan of that repair would happen. And so I think we're talking about probably complete replacement of the structure versus spot replacement of individual elements. Individual elements like a new pile or one of those Iowa DOT kind of research pile repairs, we'd expect that to last 25 years pretty easily.
But I guess, if you make a whole new bridge and you make it out of wood, is it a 75-year lifespan, or are you talking you replace some of the parts with concrete? Or
yeah, so new structures, we would propose structures. There's one south of town that's just across from. That's just by a park.
Yeah.
The steel truss.
Yeah.
It's a real short one.
Yeah.
Something like that, or concrete beams. For 3rd Street after the roadway repair portion was tabled. We investigated some different options down by Janesville. There's a pre-stressed beam, so that's a concrete beam that's really similar construction type to what's going on at Cedar Parkway. And so it'd be those types of structures that would probably be the most cost-effective because you can get so much longer spans.
Those would be the 75-year
Yep. Timber structures, we wouldn't probably expect exposed timber driven into soil to last 75 years. So
are there other, I mean, if there aren't grants, are there other partners? And I mean, I know I have asked this before, but the city is it's some kind of agreement, right? So the city is fully responsible for all of those, even though they're outside of city limits.
So the Rolling Prairie Trail System, once it gets into Butler County, is managed by the Butler County Conservation. So would the Bremer County Conservation be willing to partner? Would they have sources of funds that could maybe be leveraged? I don't know. I know that like the state recreational trails funding, they want to use it to expand the network, not to start doing maintenance work. So this has been brought up at IRCOG through the discussions that, okay, great, we're spending all this money to build trail systems out, but where are the funding sources to help with the long-term maintenance and reconstruction? Because pavement ages out, bridges age out, and so there is going to be a significant cost to communities and counties and agencies that are maintaining these.
Well, I think one opportunity might not fund the whole thing, but is the new foundation through the Northeast Iowa Community Foundation with the leisure services, is if you established a rail trail, endowment, I mean, that's what you go after is estate planning and gifts that people could put in there and let it collect.
But I mean,
it takes a while. Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's going to pay for the whole thing, but I think that's one thing we have in place if you market it and use it, But, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of, it seems like when budgets get cut, statewide or nationally, it's for this sort of thing. So that's going to be difficult.
There's not always the same elevation of infrastructure for trails as you would see for bridges and roads and highways, so it doesn't get the same exposure to the broad masses. You have certain areas that focus on it, but is not the same, priority. A lot of people think at the federal, state level for these. As Mike is saying, build and build and build them. You have to maintain what you have first in order to keep that going. There's not a lot of funding.
Well, the clear and simple takeaway is that this should be a regular item of discussion for our strategic planning, our annual and our strategic planning.
That's what I'd recommend, is that we start putting it into our strategic plan so it is a topic of discussion. Again, I think right now I see it more as within, there's some like where the pile cap doesn't touch the pile that you can do some.
Over at Slemons where we can.
Those types of things we can certainly address, but I see this more as something that we need to be addressing in that 5 to 10 year strategic plan, and so that inspection 4 years from now, I think, is going to be very, very critical. Yeah.
Does the city have a maintenance fund for the parks and park system? Other than the yearly budgeted playground equipment?
I think it's just what's in the budget, right?
It's not anything specific for that set aside. It's as we address it annually. And as we look at these, we'd either provide an annual amount to build towards doing repairs, or we would do annual repairs with a certain amount specified by council that we could fit in the budget.
Maybe a question for another conversation, but have we done any surveying to see how far the average person goes out in the trail system? I know very avid people go all the way to Denver, those type of things, but I know when I go out, I'm only out 4 or 5 miles, I turn around, come back type thing. If we need to start looking at priorities, maybe we start looking at.
There are counter boxes out right now.
Yep, we've got trail counters out right now, the intercog setup, and we don't have, we got results right away. I haven't seen any numbers recently, but I'm expecting them, pretty soon.
It'd just be interesting to know if maybe that's one way to look at it, that you start in closer and work your way out type thing.
But you have to remember it rained every other day this year. Or every day.
Still
In June,
is.
yeah.
Still is, yeah.
Every day.
Mike, how many, you talked about having alternate access points for repair vehicles and construction vehicles. How many do we have now?
I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know right off the top of my head.
Because that might also impact whether we go to the city out and hit where we already have access points and replace those first.
I know the fire department's looked at that to get our rescue vehicle and stuff out there. I think we don't have existing agreements with property owners, but I would hope they would let us out there. And I think we can get in 3/4 of the segments we can get to and wouldn't have to go down the trail.
Yeah, so there could be, again, some options are, one of the structures that was talked about was at Ivanhoe, and that's where the structure goes over a road. Do we need to continue with that, or do we regrade everything so it's an at-grade crossing with Ivanhoe? And that also eliminates a narrow underpass for the county. So I don't know if that narrow underpass is potentially impacting the ability to move agricultural equipment back and forth from one side to the other. So there may be some things like that. So we may go from 8 structures. We may be able to eliminate a couple of them. There's one structure that is by our new Barrow site that maybe it's replaced with a box culvert, or maybe it can be replaced with a series of large diameter round culverts to be able to do it. So it may not be as dire as it sounds, I think, but we need to start having that discussion.
There is a couple bridges, I always send pictures of right at where the bridge attaches to the trail where it's starting to form holes under it.
And that's where that abutment wall is starting to fail, or material's just sloughing underneath the
You
batter
can fill it,
boards.
but it goes back. It just keeps falling.
So we appreciate you letting us know so we can go out there.
I send pictures all the
stuff
time
some
right
more
here.
patch material in there.
Yeah.
We'll switch conversation a little bit off the rail trail. The one at 20th Street, could that be incorporated into the final phase of reconstruction of 20th Street from 5th Avenue? Because that is narrow. We're going to try and widen 20th Street. And maybe
I would kind of see that as a separate project. But that's certainly something that we can look at going forward. And the advantage of being able to do that would be to lengthen it so that you could actually extend a sidewalk or trail system continuing down the east side of 20th Street to get to like maybe 3rd or something where it can cross over.
because if you were going to replace it, it needs to be widened out or lengthened out, depending on your terminology.
If it was more urgent, I think we'd look at that kind of a thing, but as Casey was saying, it's years and years and years out to have to be fully replaced. So just because of the funding and the tightness what we do have to try and pile it on may not let the rest of it go. So it's something we'll consider going forward.
That may be in our 5 to 10 year plan as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
Along the bridges, so we checked all these bridges. Did we check the Bramer Avenue Bridge? Or are we not worrying about that because we know it's going to be replaced in 5 years?
It's not ours.
It's not ours? Okay, there you go.
Thanks, Casey, for your presentation. Bob, for being down. Moving on, reports from boards and commissions. Airport Commission minutes from May 9th, 2019.
Just a comment about I found it interesting in that report to reflect on a conversation we had a few years ago about the usage of our airport. and which it was suggested that it's basically for pleasure for a few privileged individuals. But I see on this report that over the course of a year, we had 276 landings or takeoffs for business, which I think maybe is good for us to pay attention to. Seems to me that we have an investment in the airport that is worth having.
And that was just through April. So.
Yeah. So far, I guess.
No, it is being used. There's no question about that. So, minutes are received into record. Staff comments.
Don't believe we have any, sir.
Whoops, tabs here.
I do have one.
Yes, Garrett.
The Waterloo Cedar Falls Symphony will be coming to perform here in Waverly at the Coleman Park Amphitheater on Sunday, July 7th at 7:30 p.m. They are putting on a free patriotic concert.
I do have a couple items. The Public Works newsletter came out last week, which must mean it's summer, because that's our summer edition. And one of the things that we want to remind and encourage everyone to do is that we have a new ordinance regarding curbside recycling that specifies you need to be getting a city container. It's only $2.90 a month, whether you choose the 35 or 65 gallon option. And you can give Public Services a call at 352-6247 or the Public Works Administration Office at 352-9065. Soft enforcement begins July 1st, which means that if you still continue to use a tote or other container, we will collect it, but you will get a reminder. And come October 1st, that's hard enforcement, which means we simply will not collect it. You still have the option of using the recycling center at no cost, but you will be responsible for taking it out there yourself.
Okay. Very good. Council comments.
I will invite anyone who wants to join me for a beer at the Wooden Foot afterwards to discuss city council meetings. I apologize for missing last meeting.
I want to thank Edie for inviting me as guest council person. You guys are wonderful to work with, and it's very interesting. I would encourage others to sit as a guest on city council and find out how much time and effort is put forth by the council members.
Well, I think Sharon has been one of the best guest council people we've had. I've never heard so many comments from somebody who doesn't have a vote, and I think that's worth a lot. I just wanted to mention that my wife and I and a guest visited the Four Queens on opening day and discovered there were so many people in line that we decided we'd try some other day. So we went home and ate ice cream at my house, but I had a little concern about getting out of there onto Bremer Avenue, wanting to go west. I think that's kind of risky. And I just wonder if it'd be good to make that a right turn only exit, because I see it as being an accident waiting to happen. There are other ways to get out besides trying to get out onto Bremer. I did it, and it was exciting.
I think the exit onto Bramer Avenue is supposed to be right turn only. Judging,
It's two-way.
Is it two? Okay.
Okay, well then, see, I shouldn't have done what I did. But I think people will try to do it.
Are those, is something like that something that can be brought up at your DOT meetings that you're still having? I mean,
Which part?
which part?
Making it right turn only.
Yeah, or can we just determine that?
And which, the driveways, you mean?
To get out, right there by the bridge. He was talking about turning left there.
Yeah.
He's saying that's difficult. Is it possible to just make it right turn only, or do you have to have the DOT approval?
Well, we already gave them approval to have it both ways. What we hope is that people will go out the other way if it's going to be busy on Bremer, go out on First. There's a lot of part of the day that it really isn't probably a big problem. So just have to judge when the traffic's bad. They don't have very many exits. It's a hard way to get in and out of that particular establishment. So we tried to do the best we could to make it safe as we could.
On the subject of safety, I did notice a stop sign that had tree branches that were partially obscuring the stop sign. Whose department is that I should?
Well, you can give Public Services a call, or you can get a Public Works admin, and we'll get the word.
Down by your house, it's like that almost all over the time. That stop sign right
Well,
there.
this is actually by my office.
Oh, well, there's one down by your house. That's the
Okay.
same.
I noticed that. The public on it.
Here says Vegetation Management, that's his wheelhouse now.
Okay, so Garrett
We'll
gets
also
the
take
email.
that call for you.
All right.
But yeah, you can give Public Works admin or Public Services, and we'll get the word passed on.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council comments, questions? Only comment I have is, again, Sharon, thank you for your guest council service, and congratulations again on your recent award.
Thank you.
Took a lot of hard work, I'm sure, to qualify for that.
30-some years.
Other than that, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of adjournment, say yes.
Yes.
We are adjourned.
I know.